Hello, this is Mrs. Arnold, and in this video, we will talk about fossils. Questions you should be able to answer at the end of this lesson are, what are the methods by which fossils are preserved? How do scientists use index fossils? And how are fossils used to interpret Earth's past physical and biological history? So, a fossil is evidence of an ancient organism that is preserved in the rock or sediment. It is more than just the physical remains of an organism. So it can also include things like the organism's tracks, footprints, burrows, and poop. And the fossil record also is going to provide evidence that life on Earth has evolved. We can use fossils to relatively date the ages of the rocks. So when a geologist finds fossils in rocks, they know the rocks are about the same age as the fossil. They can also infer that the same fossils found elsewhere are of the same age. So this picture I have here in the background is supposed to be demonstrating this. So we have one rock outcrop someplace. And then over here we have the second location. So this is location number 2, the second location. And what we can see here is that these fossils, for instance, are going to be of the same age. Now we are going to look at how fossils are formed. Remember, it takes very special circumstances for organisms to become fossils, and that very few of the organisms that have lived on the planet have actually been fossilized. The first method of fossilization is original preservation. This means that the remains of the plant or the animal has been altered very little since death. These fossils are going to be uncommon because their preservation requires extraordinary circumstances. So preservation requires extraordinary circumstances. So what I mean by that is like freezing conditions, arid conditions, or an oxygen-free environment. And some examples we are going to look at is the La Brea tar pit, insects in amber or sap, and also another example we're going to see are permafrost prehistoric trees. I think we see that example. So the first method is organisms can be preserved in sediment. The way this happens is obviously they're buried in the sediment, and that sediment turns to stone. The organism's flesh rots away, and the only thing that we have left then are the hard parts of the organism, like the teeth, like the bone, teeth, and shells. We also can find original preservation in amber. For this to happen, an insect gets trapped in ancient tree sap. The tree then falls into a swamp. The sap hardens into stone and preserves the insect. And this is a very cool method of preservation because we also get the soft parts here, which are very, very, very special circumstances where we also get the soft parts of an organism. You guys might remember too, if you've seen the first Jurassic Park, that this is supposedly how they were able to get the dino DNA, because they found a mosquito that was trapped in amber that had some dino blood in it still. Preserved in asphalt. This is another way that organisms can have original preservation. A famous example here going to be the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. And what happened here is that there was sticky tar that trapped animals like dire wolves, and saber-toothed tigers, which is a pretty cool thing. These pictures here are actually a beetle that was trapped in the La Brea tar pits, and this is another organism here that was trapped in La Brea tar pits in LA. Okay, also, organisms can be frozen and fossilized that way. This is also a very cool thing because it preserves the soft parts, aka the tissues. The reason why the tissues are preserved is because it's too cold for bacteria to decay flesh. This is a picture of a woolly mammoth that was preserved by being frozen. They found it somewhere in the Arctic or some very cold region of Earth. Okay, now we are in the altered hard parts. So when we have altered hard parts, this means that the original material of the hard parts has been replaced with new material. Okay, so under most circumstances, what we have is the soft organic material of plants and animals decay quickly. Then the hard parts that remain can get replaced. Over time, let's say remaining hard parts and some examples would be shells, bones, teeth. Can become fossilized with altered hard parts. So in the picture here, we have mineral replacement, which would be an example of altered hard parts. So in mineral replacement, the pore spaces of an organism's buried hard parts are filled in with minerals from the groundwater. So this picture on the slide is illustrating that minerals in the water replace the original materials. Petrifaction is a type of altered hard part scenario that we have. also can call it replacement. So just like what we talked about in the last slide, minerals replace the organism's tissues. And there's a very cool park called the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona, in which you can see prehistoric trees that have been fossilized. So this is an example of one. And actually, they are very pretty because they've turned into this beautiful stone. But also, the trees are proof that Arizona used to be swampy before it became all desert. That's where the trees are living, in the swamp. Okay, so sometimes we have a body fossil that are not actually body parts, but a mold or a cast of a original body part. So a mold is going to form when sediments cover the original hard part of an organism, like a shell, and the hard part is later removed by erosion or weathering. Later on, that mold might become filled with a material to create a cast of the shell. So a mold is going to be the cavity in the rock where the organism was buried. And then the cast is going to be created when sediment fills in the mold space. So we have this picture here. In this picture, we have the mold that was left by the organism, and then the organism's was eroded away, and sediment was able to come and fill in that area. And now on this side, we have the cast. A trace fossil is a very cool type of fossil. It is indirect evidence of an animal. So these are things like worm trails, the footprints we have here. Let's see. Tunneling burrows. So this is an example of a tunneling burrow. And in this case, we have a worm burrow. And also a trace fossil is going to be poop. And this is a coprolite, aka dino poop. So this is poop from a dinosaur. So trace fossils are very important because they can provide info on several things. On how the organism lived, moved, and obtained food. Okay? So, for instance, if we're looking at the footprints here, they can tell us how heavy the organism was, like so the organism's size. They can also tell us how fast the organism was walking or running. A coprolite can tell an organism's diet. And this fossilized burrow can tell us where and how the organism lived. Lastly, we have index fossils. Index fossils is a fossil that is going to be easily recognized, abundant, and widely distributed across the globe, okay? These are organisms that lived for a short period of time. So an index fossil is an index fossil because when we see that fossil in a particular rock, we automatically know that that rock is from the same period of this fossil because that was the only period that this fossil lived in. Okay, so for example, these trilobites are an excellent index fossil. So that is probably something you should know because it is something that's always talked about when talking about index fossils. So trilobites are an excellent index fossil for the Paleozoic era because each of these different trilobite species lived for a relatively short period of time before becoming extinct. So as we can see, for example, this species of trilobite, you can find it in the Permian period. So if you see that in the rock layer, you know that the rock layer was laid down in the Permian period. And then for instance, this one right here, we know it was from the Ordovician period, okay? So because these fossils lived for a relatively short period of time, we can use these fossils to tell us what period we are looking at if we're looking at rocks. Okay. So today we learned about the different types of fossils. There will be a quiz over this information, so be prepared. Next video, we are going to talk about how fossils help with relative age dating. Please have a wonderful day and be kind to one another.